Hello students, I'm good here and I hope you all are good there. Welcome to your channel Zebish English Classes. Education is everything and without education life has no meaning. So you must continue your education under all the circumstances. In our previous video, I had given you the summary of your poem The Darkling Thrush, which is from your book Reverie, that is from ISC board for the students of 11th as well as 12th standard. Today, I'm going to do the same poem in details, line by line. So let us start the poem. The poem, The Darkling Thrush, has been written by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy was a great poet as well as a novelist of the late 19th century. And we must know about 19th century that late 19th century was that era when there had been a lot of changes in the society. Industrial revolution had already taken place and it is regarded as modern era. So you can understand that because industrial revolution had already taken place, small firms and small business had all been disrupted and they had been replaced by big firms and big industries in the market. And it was a time of presentation, high presentation, and great advertisements. The entire business at that point of time had started relying not on quality but on high advertisements and hoardings and all. So, this is how you can understand that there was a great change in the society at that point of time. And what had started mattering the most, it was all about materialism and money. So, the value of the abstract ideas had started declining, and physical identity, physical entities had started gaining a lot of worth and value in that modern era. These are the features, and there is one more important, noticeable thing that was going on at that point of time. Since it was late 19th century, modern era, there was a huge advancement in the technology, and there was a great decline in faith of God. So these two are again very noticeable features of the society that had actually hurt a lot of people and had disturbed a lot of people. And one of the personalities that had been disturbed a lot by this is Thomas Hardy, our poet of this poem. It had disturbed Thomas Hardy a lot just because he was not able to absorb the fact that there was a great decline in faith of God, and everybody had started thinking scientifically, and people had started believing in science and technology. And this is how the society had started losing its values, tradition, culture, and it had started heading towards that scientific era or that era of science and technology, you can say. So these are the prominent features of 19th century that had been witnessed by Thomas Hardy. And Thomas Hardy was not at all happy witnessing the features of the society at that point of time. And therefore, he was somehow lamenting over that. And then came the time of the end of the 19th century. And when 19th century was about to come to an end, Thomas Hardy became even more sad. And the reason behind his great sadness was he was not at all able to welcome 20th century with a happy heart, being under the impression that if 19th century had shown such a disaster, then what should be expected from a new century, that is the 20th century, that would rather bring in more modernism, more, you can say, technological development, and more decline in faith of God. So that was the perspective of the poet, due to which the poet was very sad. So, we have understood this much that Thomas Hardy was absolutely sad when he wrote this poem, The Darkling Thrush. And the poem was published in December 1900. So, you can understand that in Northern Hemisphere, December is the time period when winter is coming to an end, and it is also the end of a year. And it was not only the end of a year, but it was also the end of a century at that point of time. So, overall, it was that time period when there was an end, end of a year, end of a century, and the poet was very sad at its end. So, it was published in December 1900, and that was an end of a century as well as an end of a year. The poet was very, very sad. These things are very clear. Now, on that sad note, the poem was written by Thomas Hardy. So, since he was very sad, you can understand that the sadness of the poet will surely be reflected in the poem written by him. And that so happens also because in the first two stanzas, it is very much reflected that the poet is very, very sad. Actually, the poem consists of the four stanzas. The first two stanzas are very well reflecting the sad mood of the poet as well as the negativity of the poet. But the last two stanzas of the poem will be completely positive in tone, and therefore the poem that starts on a very negative note will end on a very, very positive note. And how does it happen? It happens due to the arrival of a bird called thrush. Now, the poet has deliberately done this. Try to understand. Actually, the poet had first decided to give this poem the title of The Century's End. Right, but then later on, the poet thought that this poem should have something, at least something positive about it, because the poet wanted to give himself the realization of the significance of positive attitude towards life. And that's why, instead of giving this poem the title of The Century's End, he decided to give this poem the title The Darkling Thrush. And the title, The Darkling Thrush, actually means darkling means in the darkness or of the darkness, and thrush is a name of a bird. So, it is actually giving you this meaning that a bird in the darkness, a bird in the darkness. So, the bird that arrives in the darkness, although it arrives in the darkness, yet it carries the messages contrary to the darkness. It carries a message of positivity, hope, love, happiness. And that is how, as soon as the bird arrives in the third stanza of the poem, the entire tone of the poem changes. And the mood of the poet changes as well. And this is how the third stanza gets filled with optimism, hope, and the last stanza is also giving you the same reflection of positivity, hope, and love and happiness. And the poem ends on the same note. So, this is how the poet has written this poem, The Darkling Thrush. Now, let us start the poem line by line. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was a spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. So the poet is saying that he was standing upon a coppice gate. Now, what is coppice? Coppice refers to an area of woodland, or you can say a piece of land where there are rows of trees. That is called coppice. And the poet was standing upon a coppice gate in a leaning manner, in that position of leaning. That means he had taken the support of that particular gate of the coppice while standing, and he was standing there very, very sad when frost was spectre grey. Now it means that first of all, frost is snowfall, and snowfall is actually something that symbolizes dullness, that symbolizes death, that symbolizes sadness. So frost already is something, a symbol of sadness and death. But on that particular day, the poet found frost kind of spectre grey. Spectre grey means it was more sorrowful, it was more dull, and it was something like a ghost. It was very much horrible. And here in this line, frost has been personified. There is a figure of speech used called personification. Personification is that figure of speech in which it happens whenever something which is not a person is treated as a person, it is called to personify, and the figure of speech is called personification. Here, this word frost has been personified. We can understand it because we see that the first letter of frost F is in capital letter. It means it has been treated as a person. And secondly, it is said that frost was a spectre grey. That means on that particular day, frost was as horrible, as haunting as a ghost, as a booth. And booth or ghost is something which is related to a person. So, why was the poet thinking of Frost as a ghost? Just because the poet was so very upset, so sad, that everything around him seemed to be sad as well, seemed to be deadly to him. And therefore, that frost, which is already a symbol of sadness and dullness, had become more haunting to the poet on that particular day. And winter's dregs made desolate. Winter's dregs refers to the remaining part of winter, and we know that in northern hemisphere December is the ending of winter season. And here this poem was published in December 1900. That means it was a time when December was actually showing or giving its last part. So winter was about to come to an end very soon. So, whatever the remaining or remnant of winter was there, that was creating a kind of a desolate atmosphere. Desolate means isolation. It was causing isolation, it was causing loneliness and depression. The weakening eye of day. It means that the day seemed to be coming to an end. Now, the day seemed to be coming to an end. It was because it was getting evening time. So the day was coming to an end. It was December going on. So a year was coming to an end. And it was also the end of a century. That means this is how we can come to this conclusion that this end of a day was also signifying the end of a year. And this end of a year was also signifying the end of a century. And this is how something was coming to an end. And that end was actually very much hurting the poet. And it was hurting the poet just because the poet was not able to accept a new beginning, just because he was very negative about the new beginning. The tangled pine stems escort the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The tangled pine stems, tangled is ulcha hua, something which is very much, you can say, entangled. So, Pine stems actually refers to a kind of a climbing plant, or you can say a creeper. So here there was a creeper, a climbing plant, and you know that a climbing plant has got this nature of standing with the support of the neighboring plants, and that too in such a manner that it seems to entangle the neighboring plant. And that's how there was a pine stem that seemed to be touching the sky, that scored the sky. It was going so high. And it was again, and here when the poet actually got to see that pine stems, he compared it to the broken, to the strings of the broken lyres. And here there is a figure of speech called simile. As we can see, like word has been used, and whenever we compare something to another thing by using a word like or as, that is called simile. So here the poet has compared the tangled pine stems to the strings of the broken musical instrument. And we know that if a musical instrument is broken, obviously its strings will not give a beautiful music, but will give something in the form of a noise. So we can find out that the poet was so very upset from inside that everything outside as well seemed to be giving him some sorrowful signal. For example, the creeper, that climbing plant, also gave him that. you can say, that idea of some broken musical instrument. That means he couldn't hear anything good, he couldn't hear something in the form of a music, but he could very much had this idea of some kind of a noise, something wrong that was about to happen, according to the poet. Since the poet was very, very much, you know, you can say that he was very upset about the new beginning, and therefore he was foreboding. He was very negative in his perspectives in regard to that. And all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. Mankind is like all the human beings, all the people who had been simply on the road, on the streets, outside. As the day was about to come to an end and evening was approaching near, everyone started rushing towards their homes so that they could have their household fires, just because outside the temperature had been continuously declining and it was getting colder and colder, and people couldn't afford to be outside anymore, and that's why they had started heading towards their homes so that they could have their fireplaces and have some warmth there. So, this is how we get to see that in those countries where the winter is in this manner, that snowfall takes place and the temperature goes so down. So, there comes a kind of a depression outside, there comes a kind of a loneliness outside, because people prefer staying at their places, at their homes, and they do not prefer to go out. And on the streets outside, you'll find that there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of depression, and that is how you can very much relate loneliness and dullness and sadness with the winter season. So this is how this first stanza comes to an end. I hope you understood this stanza. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outlined his script, the cloudy canopy, the wind, its death lament. So, in this second stanza, we see that the poet had already imagined 19th century as a dead body. The poet was so very upset about the end of the 19th century that the poet had started imagining the end of the 19th century as the death of the 19th century. And since now, as the poet has already imagined that 19th century has died, so now he has to imagine the dead body of the 19th century as well. So, he sees that landscape where he is standing, that winter landscape, just because it is winter going on, everything is simply covered with snow, and that winter landscape is actually imagined by the poet as the dead body of the 19th century lying in front of him. This was the imagination of the poet. So here again there is a figure of speech called personification, because 19th century has been personified, because it has been treated as a person. We know that we do not use the word death for anything which is not a person. Example, if this book gets completely torn and it gets completely damaged, I won't say कि book की death हो गई है. I will say that the book has got damaged, it has been completely destroyed. But I will not say that it has died. If the table gets destroyed, gets damaged somehow, I will not say that the table has died. But if I say that the table has died, it means I have personified the table. So this is how it happens that 19th century is not a person, but the poet imagines it as a person, and the poet imagines it dying as a person, as if somebody has died. So the end of the 19th century is imagined as the death of the 19th century by the poet. And since the poet imagines the end of the 19th century as the death of the 19th century, the poet also has to somehow get the idea of the dead body of the 19th century, and then that winter landscape where the poet is standing, whatever he can see around himself, that landscape, the features of the land, that means the trees and the that piece of land which is covered with snow, all that together is imagined uh, as a dead body of the 19th century lying in front of the poet. And the poet imagines, okay, So here century has been personified, I told you, and corpse. Corpse means dead body, so the dead body of the 19th century. Outland means it was lying in front of the poet. His crypt, the cloudy canopy, and since century has already been personified, that's why this word his has been used for the century, which is generally used for a person, male person. Crypt, the cloudy canopy. That means the shade, the tomb. What is the tomb of of the dead body of the 19th century? That is the clouds. Just because the clouds are covering, the clouds are there as shade, right? Upon the landscape, on the land. And this is how the poet has imagined that this winter landscape is the dead body of the 19th century, and the clouds are like the covering, or you can say the shade, or you can say the tomb of the 19th century. The wind its death lament, and whenever there is a funeral or a dead body lying, you will always find around it that there's a lot of lamentation that goes on. People are crying, they are lamenting over that death, and this is how it was the imagination of the poet that the wind, the sound of that wind, that breeze, you can say, or the moving air, that had got some sound, and that sound was imagined as the sound of lamentation over the dead body of the 19th century by the poet. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken hard and dry. That means anything that comes into existence one day, that comes to birth one day, that is born one day, that is born, it is born in the form of a germ. Germination takes place, something comes into existence, it gets birth, but then after it has lived its span of life, it comes to an end. And how it gets shrunk, it gets dried up, it gets hard, and it comes to an end. So once it is ended, once it dies, it gets dried up, it gets shrunk. So this is how that 19th century that had once been born, today it has turned into a dead body, and like a dead body it has dried up, shrunk, and turned hard. And every spirit upon earth seemed frivolous as I. And it is very much natural. It is a human tendency to think in that way as the mood is. For example, if you are sad from inside, everything outside also seems to be sad to you. So, since the poet is very sad and he is imagining the end of the 19th century as the death of the 19th century, and he's mourning over that death, he's lamenting over it just because he is not at all positive about a new century, and he's not able to welcome the 20th century with a happy heart. And therefore, he thinks that everyone else as well in the world is thinking with the same perspective as the poet. And so he says that every spirit, everybody, every human being, every single person upon the earth must be as fervorless as I am. Fervorless means as spiritless, as energyless, as without enthusiasm, without charm, without happiness as I am. Means everyone must be as much sad as the poet is. This was the thought of the poet, and it was simply because he himself was not feeling good enough. So, this is the second stanza. I hope you understood this. Now, the third one. Third stanza brings about a great change in the poem. As we know, at once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overheard, in full-hearted even song of joy illimited. That means all of a sudden it happens that a voice is heard by the poet from the bleak twigs. Twigs refers to the branches of the trees, and bleak means dull. And why are the branches of the trees dull? Just because it is winter season going on. Therefore, there is no leaf upon them, and they all are covered with snow. As a result, they look very dull and bleak. So, from there, a voice is heard by the poet, and that voice is actually full of joy, elation, happiness. And that voice is singing some evening song, some carolings or hymns, that is the religious songs that praise God. And those songs had unlimited joy. Unlimited is unlimited, unconfined. There was no limit to the joy that the songs contained. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. That means the bird had got this physical appearance. It is the physical appearance of the bird that has been described here. That the bird looked very aged, it looked very weak. Frail means weak, gaunt, thin, small. Blast beruffled plume means it seemed to be a victim of some kind of a storm, due to which it had lost its feathers, they had been broken. In spite of such a pathetic physical appearance of the bird, and at the same time the bird had entered into a dark phase, the bird chose to sing the songs full of hope, love, and positivity. That was something very surprising for the poet. He's saying, had chosen thus to fling his soul, means he had chosen to throw its soul upon the growing gloom, means upon that society, that phase, that era where gloom had been continuously increasing. Gloom is sorrow, sadness. Sadness had been continuously increasing in that phase. And when at the same time the bird itself seemed to be a pathetic victim of some kind of a storm, how could it sing the songs full of happiness, joy, hope, and love and positivity? That was something shocking for the poet. And that would probably bring about a great change in the mood of the poet. So, this was the third stanza. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around. Little cause for carolings. Carolings refer to hymns, as I told you. These are those religious songs that praise God. Cause means reason. The poet was looking for some reason that would have kind of motivated the bird to start singing the songs full of hope and positivity. But the poet was not at all able to find out any reason behind this optimism of the bird of such ecstatic sound. Ecstatic means full of happiness, joy, ecstasy. Ecstasy is excitement wali khushi, happiness with excitement. So the songs that were being sung by the bird, they contained ecstatic sound. That is, the sounds that were full of happiness as well as excitement. And the content of the song was about the terrestrial things. Terrestrial means something that belongs to the earth. Afar is dur, that is at distance, or nigh. Nigh means near. That means everything that is at distance or near, that was somehow or the other a part of the earth, that had become content of the songs that were being sung by the bird. That means the bird, although seemed to be heavenly, it was simply praising the content on the earth. It was praising about the earth. It was singing about those things that are present on the earth. That means the bird was not at all negative about this earth, about this world. That I could think there trembled through his happy good night air. The poet is saying that the poet could think there, trembled is vibrated, echoed. That means some kind of a positive vibe was echoing, was vibrating in that farewell song. Good night air is farewell song that was being sung by the bird. Why the farewell song? It was a farewell song just because the 19th century was coming to an end, and therefore it seemed to be a farewell song to the poet. But the farewell song was not at all full of sadness or sorrow. Rather, it was full of joy and happiness and hope and love and positivity. Some blessed hope whereof he knew, I was unaware. Then the poet comes to this conclusion in the last two lines of the poem, that this bird must be some blessed hope. it must be some blessed soul which is in the disguise of hope. So, hope here again has been personified. It must be some blessed soul in the disguise of hope that this bird, knows something which is not known to me. That means this bird is aware of some such positivity, some such happenings, some such knowledge that I don't have. It is a blessed soul. It must be aware of something very heavenly, some heavenly knowledge that I don't have, and therefore I am upset and the bird is happy. And this is how the poet comes to the conclusion that due to this, whatever be the circumstances, despite all the odds in life, one should always try and be happy and positive in life, because negativity will never help you solve your problems. But positivity will surely help you to at least confront them bravely. So I hope you understood the poem. Now I'll just give you a summary of all the stanzas very quickly. So the first stanza was all about the description of the poet's mood and where he was standing. He was standing upon a coppice gate. He was very sad. He was just thinking about the end of the 19th century as the death of the 19th century, due to which he was finding everything around himself very sad and full of sorrow, and full of sadness, you can say. And this is how what happened, that the poet found that snowfall also very haunting on that particular day, and he found the pine stems also like the musical instrument whose strings are broken. And this is how he found that as the day was coming to an end, evening was approaching near, everyone had started heading towards their homes just because they couldn't afford to stay outside. It was getting colder and colder, the temperature was continuously coming down, as a result of which there was a lot of loneliness and depression that had started spreading outside. So this is how that was somehow adding harmony to the mood of the poet, just because the external environment was also giving you that hint, that idea of depression due to the winter season that was going on. And also from inside, the poet was very very sad about the end of the 19th century, just because of his negative thoughts about the 20th century. So, in the second stanza, he imagines 19th century as a dead body lying in front of himself, and he imagines winter's landscape metaphorically as the dead body of the 19th century, and the wind's sound is also imagined as a sound of lamentation by the poet over the dead body of the 19th century. And this is how he feels that everyone must be as much sad as the poet is feeling at present. So that was all about the second stanza. The third stanza brings about a tremendous change in the entire mood of the poet as well as the entire tone of the poem. Actually, in the third stanza arrives the bird called thrush, and that thrush brings a message of love, hope, positivity, optimism, and as soon as it enters, it starts singing some songs. In the third stanza, its physical appearance has been described, which is so very pathetic that you start wondering how could such a bird that is so looks like a victim of some kind of a storm, and that too it enters into that phase, that era where when there's a lot of sadness all around, and the bird is still singing the songs full of happiness and joy and positivity. So that is how even the poet had got very much surprised, and he was not at all able to find out the reason behind such hidden positivity of the bird. And in the fourth stanza, you see when the poet heard the carolings or the hymns or the religious songs that were being sung by the bird, that were full of joy and happiness, and that contained the content on the earth and the earthly things, you can say. The poet was thinking in this manner at that point of time, that this vibrating sound of the music of the song that is being sung is like a farewell song, but it still contains something very positive in itself, and therefore This soul which is singing such songs, it must be some blessed soul which is in the disguise of hope, and therefore I must realize that I am not at all aware of what will happen next. I don't know what can happen. I should not be predicting only negative happenings just because I'm not at all aware of what may happen next. And this soul seems to be aware of what will happen next. It means that this soul has got some such knowledge which I don't have. And therefore, when I don't know exactly what can happen ahead, I should, instead of being negative, I should be positive. And that is how the poet ended this poem, on a positive note which had started on a negative note. So this is how this poem comes to an end. I hope you understood the poem. So you please tell me in the comment section whether you understood, whether you liked it. If you've actually liked, you please like it as well, and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.